Okay, welcome back, dear viewers. Um, Decided to get back to talking about magic in Lamentations of the Flame Princess. But before we get into that, uh, just as a reminder, this channel is about playing games and reviewing games. I record myself playing them, and then I review the supplements and the modules and the games that I'm using, so you know that I've actually used them. Nothing against the flip through review, but I don't really get much out of them. I find that sometimes your reading experience is different from your actual play experience, and I just think something a little bit more in depth is warranted here. So if that's something you'd like, I have actual plays, one shots. Hit like and subscribe, bell icon, yada yada yada. So let's get into it. Alright, so what are these books? Vaginas Are Magic and Eldritch Cock. Well, Vaginas Are Magic is a free RPG Day release from 2017. It was a hardcover release, under 50 pages. Eldritch Cock was about the same. Um, Raji actually states in the first book, Vaginas Are Magic, that this was a chance for him to push the envelope a little bit more rather than release a quote safe book that has a nice cover and a nice, easy to digest title. Eldritch Cock came out a year later, again, another free RPG Day release. Um, Essentially, it was mentioned in the first book, but more as a continuation of the joke, right? That he's going to have to release this. But then the fans actually demanded it. So here we are. And you can get these as PDFs, free PDFs, at the lotfp.com website. I think it directs you to Drive Through RPG. I found the hardcovers on eBay. If you're looking for physical copies, you're going to actually have to do that to find them. I'm doing this review a little bit out of order. I usually wait to say go get these until the very end, but I'm doing this now because it's a no-brainer. They're free PDFs, and they're really great to use in your games, and you should try to incorporate them. And I'll explain. Okay, so both these books provide an alternative magic system for your magic user and elf characters. And as you've probably guessed, I do think options for players are good. I think one of the big drawbacks from OSR, like classic original D&D gaming, is that there's just not a whole lot of options for players, and players really like that. I think that's one of the reasons why you have such focus on character builds in the more newer editions of the world's most popular role-playing game, because players like those options. Granted, if your game system is skewed too much towards player options, you're going to overburden your game, and it's going to become almost unplayable, in my opinion. But at the very least, it's going to lead to DM game master burnout. But something like what these books provide, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, do not do that at all. It's just an alternative magic system. I personally think multiple magic systems fit the theme that Lamentations of the Flame Princess embraces. Magic is chaos. Magic is part science, it's part art. Not one magic user or elf should be the same as the next. So by providing these options for players, they can play a Vancian mage, or they can play this, which is a more spontaneous casting style system. Yes, there is preparation, but it's not as strict as the more Vancian style magic user and elf in the main book. And this alternative game system has mishap tables, thereby sort of underscoring how risky and dangerous magic is. And I think the inclusion of these sort of mishap tables with other games, I think Dungeon Crawl Classics has it, is a neat idea. It's not for everybody, but again, as an alternative for your players, it certainly works and adds some flavor. So how do these work? Well, there's no spell level. So when you look at these books, every page is going to have a different spell, right? And there's going to be some art to each spell, and that's it. And then you just flip through them. There's no spell levels. They're all considered the equal level. And if there is a spell that suggests it can be cast at a higher or lower level, the magic user elf can cast it at a lower level if they'd like. They can kind of control the power of the spell, if you would. Beginning of spells is very similar to Vancian. You get 3 random spells for an MU. Elves get 1. However, there is no read magic. Just jumping down to number 4, rather than having to use read magic, there really is no magical language. It's just use the spell comprehend language can crack a magic user's personal code. And for purposes of researching spells, all the spells in these books are considered 3rd level. And preparing spells is very similar to what's in the main book. However, you get 1 spell per caster level, and it can be from your spell book, someone else's spell book, or a scroll, which is different. It's spontaneous casting, so the magic user and elf get 1 slot per level that can be used to cast a spell without risk or penalty. That's just how many they get. 3rd level caster gets to cast 3 spells a day. Okay, and they can cast any number of prepared spells in any combination up to their casting limit before they have to prepare spells again. So if you have 3 of the Raise Dead spell that I have imaged here, it's not exactly what it's called. You can cast that 3 times. If you're a 3rd level magic user. The rule here about delaying an action actually is derived from the concept of holding an action. So like casting a spell is going to take you a full turn. So that's essentially how the spontaneous casting works. It's still very similar to Vancian, but you can choose whatever you want and cast as many times as you want as needed. But here comes the risky casting aspect of these rules. So when certain conditions are met, you can still cast the spell, but it becomes risky, and you have to make a save versus magic. On a failure, you roll on the miscast table, and then for each additional valid condition met, you have a penalty to the saving throw. So what are the conditions? You casting beyond your limit. This is the neat thing. So if you're a 3rd level magic user, you can cast a spell 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 10 times, but once you go beyond that 3 limit, you're going to have to, it gets risky, right? You can also cast spells that you haven't prepared, from your own spell books. That's where like you kind of open up your spell book and just cast the one that you probably should have prepared, but that's risky because you haven't prepared it, so you're kind of casting it on the fly, so to speak. Casting directly from a scroll in another spell book, same thing, right? Casting beyond a safe level of encumbrance. So if you recall, spellcasters, Vancian, can't cast magic if they're more than lightly encumbered, lightly encumbered or worse. Elf, it's more than lightly encumbered. Here, with these alternative rules, if you're just more than lightly encumbered, that's risky. Okay, and then of course, instead of being interrupted by taking damage in a round, you can still cast your spell. It's just it becomes risky. So if there is a miscast spell, it takes effect when the spell takes effect, not before, and the results are rolled by the referee and only revealed when the characters involved become aware of the consequences. So depending on what happens, you might not know. You might think the spell just fizzled, which is possible. Casters can miscast on purpose if they'd like. However, the player cannot choose the miscast result. I think that's interesting. Players may want to hedge their best to see if they can get something that get some kind of interesting effect based on the miscast tables. So that's interesting. And then, of course, as a game supplement, if you don't want to use this as an alternative system of magic, you can just use the spells in here as Vancian spells, but they're all considered first level. And vice versa, you could take the Vancian spells from the main book and translate them over into spells for your Vaginas of Magic, Eldritch Cock casters. But you'd have to come up with the miscast tables, which I'll explain in a second. So the miscast table is a d12 on a roll 1 through 6. It's a custom effect specific to the spell. So every spell entry in these books has 1 through 6 what happens. Okay, so if you were going to translate Vancian magic into this system, you would have to come up with that 1 through 6 for the light spell or magic missile or summon or whatever. The remaining, 7 through 12, is like a general chart, and that can result in the summoning a creature, a different spell being cast, randomly determined, time shifts, damaging radiation, alien light that does some crazy stuff, and then microscopic organisms being released into the region. It's pretty interesting and wild what can happen. But that's essentially it. That's the miscast table. What I found really fun and interesting about these two books written by James Raggi is that all the spells were inspired by black metal. He basically took a song title, listened to the song, and read the lyrics to get an idea of like how the spell works. And I think that's just a cool way of designing your own spells. So I think this book provides you sort of with a primer on developing your own magic that gives you like this cool fantasy feel, and maybe even a little bit more poetic as opposed to fireball, lightning. You can take Ride the Lightning by Metallica, for example. Well, what does that do, as a spell? I'm going to cast Ride the Lightning, I'm going to cast For Whom the Bell Tolls. I know Raggi's more into the black metal stuff. I'm not, but in the back of Vaginas of Magic, there's 120 song titles with the name of the band that you reference there for your use if you want to come up with some more spells to add. And as I stated before, each entry has some cool art to go along with that spell for inspiration. I'm going to give you a couple examples. This comes from Eldritch Cock. It's called Curses Scribed in Gore. I probably should have wrote the band name that came up with that song title, but basically the caster has to open up their bowels, and basically any attacker has to, if they fail their save, they can only hit the caster or the target of the spell on a natural 20, and if they do get that natural 20, the attacker's hit does minimum damage, like 1 hit point, right? The risks associated with risky casting all involve some kind of nastiness with the bowels and the ruptured abdomen. So it's kind of gross, but as you can, it's very Lamentations of the Flame Princess as far as I'm concerned, and very horrific. And Eldritch Cock art is color, whereas you get a lot of black and white ink in Vaginas or Magic. And this is another one, sepulchral voice. This allows the caster to imitate the voice of a dead person, provided that person was murdered and the caster still has the head or skull of the person on his or her person. This would have been an interesting spell to in Malthus Bellfire's repertoire, considering he liked to carry everyone's face around in his book, his spell book. In my actual play, Lamentations of Elemental Evil, again, the risks involve, for this spell, it actually involved potentially the murdered person's psyche taking over the magic user's psyche. Very interesting spell, but that's basically how these work. I mean, you just take this cool black metal name and then come up with a spell around it. It might actually be kind of a fun exercise just to come up with your own spells for your own game. And it doesn't have to be black metal. I mean, if you're going with high fantasy, I don't know, maybe use The Who, do or maybe I don't know, The Doors or something, So Eldritch Cock actually has a bit more to it than Vaginas or Magic. In it contains a magic item called the Rod of Lordly Might. It is a holy relic, or potentially a fake holy relic, that allegedly is the preserved penis of Jesus Christ. It could be any religious figure if you want. It's meant as a joke, but it's Lamentations of the Flame Princess, so it's totally serviceable and useful. It can do all kinds of things like get people to follow you, feed you, squirts out stuff to purify food. It's it's interesting, but it's an example of some of the magic items that you might want to consider for your Lamentations of the Flame Princess game. Magic items are not just a +1 sword. They're something with history, very unique, and I think that the Rod of Lordly Power, as much as it is kind of a joke and a play off of an earlier Advanced Dungeons and Dragons magic item, I think it's a good example of like what magic items should be in Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Unique, cursed, or crazy, strange items that make you think twice before you use them, and not just some, thing that's going to give you a +1 on a roll. The book Eldritch Cock also contains some playtest rules that for a second edition of Lamentations of the Flame Princess. I haven't used them, so I'm not going to comment on them. I will note there be no clerics or demi-humans. It's just the 3 original classes: the warrior, the magic user, the specialist. Rolling ability scores will determine your initiative dice. So the higher dexterity you have, the higher die you would use for initiative. Higher the constitution score you roll, the higher the hit dice you would use regardless of your class. For your hit points, higher your strength gives you more slots for encumbrance before you become more encumbered. Charisma and wisdom affect your saving throw dice, which is a dice pool system. And then intelligence gives you skill points. Okay, so all the classes will have access to the skills to begin. That, I think, is interesting because it allows you to kind of customize your character a little bit more. But on its face, I don't know if I would use these playtest rules. But again, I haven't used them, so do with them what you will. It also introduces some new skills, which I had talked about in a prior video, a common adventuring skills video, which I think was pretty popular, and I think everyone should watch it. I'll put a link to it in the description below. Okay, so using these options. Okay, so there is an implication that Vaginas or Magic is for women casters and Eldritch Cock is for males. I guess you could do that if you want, just kind of to play along with the titles. However, like I said, I think it's just tongue-in-cheek. I think you can use these side by side with Vaginas Magic users and elf characters if you want, or you could just completely replace it and don't use Vaginas Magic at all. If you were to use it side by side, again, it's like an option for players and almost creates a different type of magic user in your world. So where the Vancian is sort of like this scholarly type who has to research and study and memorize and all this other stuff, the Vaginas or Magic Eldritch Cock caster is more spontaneous. Maybe it's a curse or a blessing from some eldritch power. Maybe it's in their blood. Maybe it's like an elven thing or a half-elven thing or whatever. For purposes of my Lamentations of Elemental Evil campaign, I decided to make this alternative magic system mandatory for any elf character. I like the idea of elves being sort of spontaneous casters and sort of inherently magical. The more horrific nature of these spells also sort of fits the theme and cosmology of elves in my campaign world. They are the Fae, they come from another realm, and they're not exactly nice people. They're not necessarily evil or anything, though they could be, but they're definitely not traditional magic users, and I wanted to have that separation from the Vancian option. So, but that is it for today's video. Thanks again for watching. I hope you like it. Again, hit like and subscribe and the bell icon. There will be additional actual plays for my Lamentations of Elemental Evil campaign. If you watched the latest episode, 23, there was a TPK, but the party is going to continue with new characters, and we will be doing that next Thursday. And I am currently trying to schedule a one shot for Alien RPG. I owe it. I know I've been talking about it for months. I owe you guys that, and I do want to start doing a deep dive into Alien RPG. I think it's an interesting game. So hopefully that'll be in the next month to 6 weeks. So, but anyway, that's all I have. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.